So I've spent hours talking about this game's story, every single event, but these of course aren't experienced in a vacuum. There's some medium that these stories are experienced through, and this is what I'm going to talk about now, along with things that simply didn't fit in my format. And I want to get my biggest gripe about the game out of the way immediately. I chose to cover the 3DS version, and it is an improvement over the PSX version, but I can't help but to second guess myself because of the one aspect in which it's subjectively inferior. The new localization sucks. The PSX version was written entirely in standard English, similar to how most of the fan translations are for other Dragon Quest games. But it also had the flavor of a fan translation in terms of its quality. There was some nonsense in there, it definitely wasn't perfect. One thing it wasn't though was this nonsense. In the 3DS version, you visit a town, right? And while it had some normal name in the original, here it's like the Pepperoni pizza town and every NPC starts a dialogue by saying "Mamma mia!" It's these incredibly surface level nationalities unnecessarily bound to each region to make it more memorable or something. There's purists that are opposed to all name changes, and I can see that stance. It's annoying when you don't understand town names because they got changed. I don't think changing the names is inherently bad, but I do think that Dragon Quest is a series meant for everyone. It's supposed to be easy to get into, and what isn't easy is understanding what some NPCs are even trying to say. What isn't easy is trying to not slam my head full force against the edge of my table when NPCs keep saying something in Spanish or whatever and then repeat what they just said except now in English. I do think that Dragon Quest localizations, especially the first ones with archaic English, but even the dialect heavy ones, are terrible and in large part responsible for the serious failure over here in the West. It's counterintuitive to the core philosophies of the series, and while, like any media, it means different things to different people, and I'm sure that Pepperoni Pizza Town has grown on some people, I'm glad that newer games moved away from this. I like quoting this interview where Howie basically says that he thinks the localizations suck because they added unnecessary flavor and that distorts his original vision. You know how I said that Dragon Quest VII's stance is that distortion of history is not inherently bad, it can do good, like when Gründal's village elder uses the fabricated past as motivation to do his best for the town and its people. But it can also be harmful. I think a lot of the localizations are a hazard and shouldn't be read. I'm trying to be concise here, so without going into much more detail, I simply say that for 2013 this was no longer where the bar was at, and it never should have been. I completely ignored most of the nationality stuff in my videos, because there's nothing to it. The dialogue is just sometimes interspersed with a mamma mia here and there. It's as shallow as can be. Standard English is better, not only for this game but for Dragon Quest as a whole, and this, alongside some puzzles and some changes to the vocation system, specifically the removal of hybrid abilities, actually make for a good argument in favor of the PSX version. Most stuff is better in the 3DS version though. The models now look like Legos instead of pixels, which to clarify is an improvement. There still aren't enough unique models, a lot of important recurring NPCs don't get a unique model, which is jarring, and a lot of scenes are either not shown but told, or the game cuts away for things that would have needed animating. The common flashing screens and cuts to black only get more annoying because of the longish load times. There's also not as many compositions as the game needed. So the songs you hear in the background don't always fit the scenes, and some you just hear too often. The experience as a whole is held back significantly by hardware limitations. But that's whining out of the way, because the rest of this video focuses on things the game does really well that I couldn't talk about yet. Something I only briefly mentioned were implications behind finding the Mirror of Ra hidden away by Orgolimir, who is trying to protect his guys. But that is not a one-off thing. Item locations in general are thought out quite well. One of my favorites is a cursed helmet in the Cathedral of Light. Before any of the real foreshadowing that the Almighty might not be what he pretends to be, it already makes you wonder, what is this doing here? One thing I can't do a good job covering in video format are the many cross-references between areas through books. This always hints at the world once long ago not being fragmented, and the Zeros, for example, exist in history books around the world. There's also 2 book series, one about Little Ronnie the Thief and one about a mini metal maniac, and those are their own storylines that you follow throughout the game and that pay off in the end. What I also couldn't do justice to is how lovable the people around the world really are. All thanks to some smart NPC design. The game excels at progressing NPCs alongside an event for flavor. There are so many NPCs that are just one quirk. For example, in Gründal there's this one guy that stays in bed. Then throughout the event, as you progress through it, the NPCs always keep that quirk but react to whatever you've been doing, or they add little twists. And sometimes in the present there's even the descendants of NPCs from the past, or there's something to remember them by. This goes such a long way, and it's not like every town has one of these, but almost every NPC functions like this. Even if some are less about a quirk they have, but more about the specific topic they talk about. This is what flavor means, not just making every NPC in town Mamma Mia. And it's really something you will only understand if you play the game. Something that is in fact congruent between my videos and the game is how extremely segmented, or you could say fragmented, all of these stories are. There's a hard cut after most of them, and there's rarely even a thematic connection between an event and the one directly preceding it. I see Dragon Quest VII as a collection of fairy tales. Dragon Quest VII's past events seem like they could be their own set of regional variants of existing fairy tales, and most events could pass as actual folklore. You do write history, and most of these events turn into actual in-game folklore after all. And fairy tales are anthropologically interesting because they have recurring elements in them. You end up looking at the past to learn about human behaviors or feelings that stay the same. At the end of the day, what really matters are the people. What Dragon Quest VII seems to do is that it turns one fairy tale into multiple events, similar to how variants of stories exist. For example, there's many about deals with a devil gone wrong, and there's many about fear of the unknown leading to unnecessary violence. And thus, you automatically end up comparing. You end up wondering about the differences as well as the similarities. You can't help but be curious. And on that note, the game does an exceptional job at not spelling everything out for you. It's at times incredibly on the nose, but at times it's incredibly subtle. I know I took the fun out of that with my videos, but a lot of the enjoyment for me at least comes from gluing things together in certain events. For example, it took me pretty long to realize that both you and Captain Shark Eye only have fragments of the water spirit's mark on your arms, and bringing them together is what reawakens her. This is never spelled out, you'd only know by looking at the hero's hand and by remembering one throwaway line Captain Shark Eye says. It's not hidden, it's not some ARG stuff, but it's not in your face either. This of course goes back to nourishing your curiosity. There wouldn't be anything to be curious about if the game spoon-fed you. It's an engaging and really fun game to think about. When it comes to the story, that is. Vocations have been gutted in this version, but they still partly retain the spirit of the original. They are progress oriented. When you switch to something mastered, you need to confirm that you're really sure that you don't want something that you can still progress in. Dragon Quest VII wants you to be curious and tread new paths. Even if it would be optimal to just use tier 2 classes and minimize grinding in the 3DS remake. This all is your potential that the final post-game boss, the 4 elemental spirits, talked about. This game really gives you a feeling of progression. In combat, where you grow to stronger vocations, in the narrative, where you are less often seen as a child the farther along you go, and you yourself gain a better understanding of the world, of the mechanisms behind it. One of these, the vocations, might have been a bit of a lie though. That is because the balance isn't really all that there. There comes a point where you learn thin air on 1 or 2 people and every random battle ends with you spending 0 MP and taking no damage, now for the rest of the game. The game, even with minimal grinding, will be a cakewalk. But what if you don't grind at all? In that case, it would take you a while until you even learn thin air. Grinding in Dragon Quest games often functions as an inbuilt difficulty slider in practice. If the game is too hard, then go and grind. Thus the difficulty will be just right for everyone because they themselves decide. You will either find out what new abilities you learn from a vocation, or you will have to innovate and find solutions to get past difficult obstacles. The 3DS version toned the difficulty down a lot, but you can still make it hard, specifically by avoiding random battles. And thanks to the newly introduced overworld encounters, you can do just that. I think it's janky, but it ends up working out alright. So enemies just fall into super simple types of movement, some don't move, others lock onto you and go in a straight line, and the second type makes up 90% of all enemies. The actual gameplay to avoid them is really simple but boring. You have to wait until they turn around and you can slip past them. Or you have to get an obstacle between you and them so that they can't reach you and eventually despawn. It helps that you can't despawn all enemies like you can in Dragon Quest 8 by loading the equip menu, but you can still open my menu and monsters will walk right through you. So with enough patience you can sneak past almost everything. It's not great, but I think monsters are not so easy to avoid that it becomes brainless like in Dragon Quest 8 on 3DS or on Dragon Quest 11 with the sprint button, though not having to worry at all about monsters is also nice. I'm not sure which I prefer. And finally, I want to say that this is about Dragon Quest 7. These games are not homogeneous and they hold different values. World exploration is a huge aspect of other games, but this one is extremely linear. The most linear, even more so than Dragon Quest 11. But I do see curiosity as a core idea of Dragon Quest. Usually the gameplay feeds and utilizes the player's curiosity. Dragon Quest 1 only has the player's curiosity on its side. And games like Dragon Quest 8 have such a strong focus on the world. It's often only a part of the gameplay, not the narrative, which is why Dragon Quest 7 is abnormal for a Dragon Quest game. Parts of the gameplay are still about the spirit of adventure, at least to a small extent, but Dragon Quest 7 is the only Dragon Quest game with a story so directly about curiosity. And the stories are so diverse that there's bound to be something that piques your curiosity for everyone, no matter who you are. It might appear strange at first, but beneath the exterior, if you get to know this game, it is at the end of the day very much a part of the Dragon Quest family.